Congratulations on making it this far into the course. This lesson, we're going to do a quick overview of everything we've done thus far into the course, as well as I'm going to be showing you some resources that you can use to further your development of RESTful APIs, such as databases that you can use within Node as well. So first of all, we set up our index.js file. We also opened up the terminal. The terminal gave us the ability to run Node, and it also gave us the ability to install the packages from Node Package Manager that we needed within the application. So we needed Express in order to provide our routing and our quick server setup. So that gave us the ability to do localhost and set up all these routes with different methods. So we've got post, get, put, and delete. So those are the typical methods that are used. We also brought in body parser. So that allowed us to communicate data and send information from our front end to our back end and read that information. And then lastly, we brought in a SQLite database, which allowed us to store data. So even when we restart the server, all of this information stays persistent within the database and we can always access it. And it actually ended up creating a small database file that we can see that's sitting on within our project files. So we can see that this is the file that all of our data is being saved to, and then whenever we need the data, we simply access it. So we bring it into our project and access it from our script. So we set up opening up the database. Here we're using middleware to grab the body parser, also JSON content, and then we're setting up our static page. So that was the index page, index.html. So we're not using the get method in order to get the content. We're going to a file, a static file. So that's this one over here. And this allowed us to build out a simple front page interface that sits on our website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we brought in jQuery as well for added functionality. And that allowed us to make our requests to the server's database. And in order to pick up those requests, so we had a number of routes. So these are the routes that we're using, and we're using users. And what users does is whenever we refresh, and if I open up our console, we can see that from the server end, we're actually outputting all of our data that's sitting in our database as JSON data. So we've got our query to the database for all of the users' information, and we're simply outputting it within an object and then picking up that and then writing that into our web page. Next, we've got post. So this gives us the ability to add, we can add new users, new passwords, and we just need to click, and then that adds it into our database. And we see that whenever we do the next query again, that we get return back an ID. So that's where it's been added in the database. That's the ID that's for the item that was just added. And then when we query that get again, we get 4 items being returned here. So we get ID 14, so that's the last one that we added in. So that post allows us to add, inserting into the database. And we're also logging out to the console. So this is the server end. And that's why we've got the server here. So we see that there's no errors that are being thrown. And of course, we could add in some error handling here as well. Next, we've got our parameters that we're passing for users ID. So this gives us the ability to click view, and we open up to a new page, and we see that we've got the route here at the top where we've got users, and then whatever value is here is actually being passed in as ID, so request parameter ID, and then we can pick it up and use it within our code. And this is also a get method, and within RESTful APIs, so there's get, put, post, and delete. So we've got post, we've got get, and then over here we've got put and delete. So what put does is it allows us to make new updates. So we can update the username, update password. And then when we hit save, it actually updates the data in the database. So that's what put is doing. And we're also checking for errors within the put function, and that we're simply updating. So we're getting those request parameters from the body. So this is coming from body parser middleware, giving us the ability to do request, body, and then we've got all of the body information. So we can just make use of it within our code. We can simply deposit it into our SQL query and update our correct ID within our database. And then lastly, we had delete. So delete is relatively similar to what put was, where we're grabbing and we're simply using the request parameters ID in order to update it. So all we need to provide in the front end is we just need a route, a put, and a delete route, and that gives us the ability to delete out those users. So we can see it when we open up Postman. So this is Postman here. So if I change users to an ID, so let's see what IDs we've got here. We've got 11. So let's open up Postman, and we're going to do users 11, and we're going to do delete. So what that will do is that will delete out and remove out that particular element. And because this is in the database, when we refresh it, we see that we were successfully able to remove that one. And we could also just as easily update it as well. So those were the full RESTful API methods that we had available to us. And we were using all of the CRUD. We're also using Postman. So that was what we just opened up here in order to quickly test out our routes, make sure that they're working, see the different responses, the JSON responses that we're getting back. So we could see all of that information here. We could see all of the users. So we could send it on a GET, and we see that we get all of the users' information returned back in JSON. So we're using Postman as a tool in order to build out our routes, check our routes, make sure they're all working properly before we proceeded to the front end. And then once we had our routes established and set up, we can move to the front end, because now it's just a matter of doing straight front end code. So we had a little bit of styling to present our content better. And we set up a form to create inputs. So that's this over here. We also had a few buttons to create interactive elements within our JavaScript. And then we brought in jQuery because jQuery does AJAX really well. So we did want to focus on the different RESTful API methods. So bringing jQuery in made it a lot easier within the front end. So we could simply connect using jQuery's AJAX method to the users to delete them if we wanted to. So sending a delete request. We could do a put request. We could also we showed you some of the default shorthand methods within jQuery. So post is shorthand for jQuery AJAX post. So instead of doing this long format, we could use the shorter format, and we serialized the information from the form. So just serialized all of this information and sent it over. And we can also see that whenever we enter anything in here, we're actually outputting it within our console as well. So we're logging out the data, and then we're sending it over. So next, we had building of the page. So this was the function that we run that constantly builds and rebuilds the page. We loop through all of the user's information that's returned from the server, and we loop through each one of those, and we could style that as needed using just HTML and building out what our data looks like. We also showed you how you can use jQuery's data method in order to store data that you can access whenever that element gets referenced. And then that actually saves you from having to do attributes within that element, where you can simply hold it in data and then you can access that information as needed. So that was all of the code that we were running through and that we were using. So we kept it within just a few files in order to simplify this RESTful API and also give you a good base in order to build upon. So now it's up to you. So there's a number of options that you can extend what you've learned in the earlier lessons. And if you're looking to still continue to use SQLite, there's a great resource at SQLitetutorial.net. They've got a ton of information, all the different queries that you can make using SQL, and there's just a lot of great information here. So you can continue to build out what we've done over here and build it in and using the SQLite website. There's also on Express itself, so within the routing. So if you're looking to use different databases, and there's a number of great databases that are relatively easy to bring in. A popular one is Mongo database. as well as Couch database. So these are also very useful, very versatile databases, and you could set them up and bring them into your RESTful project as well. So this will show you how to install them and then how to a sample execution of the code. And there's got some code snippets here that you can utilize in order to set up these different databases within your application. And then, of course, there's a ton of stuff that you can do with Node and continue to extend using the Node package manager and bringing in more packages and adding more advanced functionality into your application. So I do encourage you to take what you've learned in the earlier lessons, build upon it, experiment with the code, try things out, and see what you can make happen and see what you can extend from the RESTful API that we've built in the earlier lessons.